What if I told you that your marriage doesn't have to end, but that the man you are today does? This sentence may hurt, but it's the truth no one tells you. Most relationships don't end because of a lack of love, but rather because of excessive neglect. Men become silent, fade away, and lose themselves. And when they realize it, they no longer lead anything, not even themselves. The story you'll see here is real. And perhaps it's all too similar to yours. A marriage on the brink of collapse, a tired wife, a man addicted to pornography and trapped in compulsive masturbation. But instead of blaming the world, he did the unthinkable. He stopped. He breathed. And immersed himself in a 90-day inner journey that not only transformed his energy, but also saved his family. By the way, before I continue, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. This way, I can continue bringing you valuable content like this, which helps you truly change your life, without any fuss and with lessons no one dares to share. Get ready to hear what no one teaches in schools or barrooms: the power that exists within a man who learns to contain and transmute his sexual energy. Yes, I'm talking about semen retention, an ancient practice ignored by most, but which could be the key to restoring your masculinity and regaining everything you thought you had lost. You will understand why unbridled desire is destroying modern relationships, how pornography corrodes a couple's soul, and, most importantly, how an ordinary man managed to completely change his story with discipline, silence, and attitude. This isn't a cute story. It's a true story. And maybe, it's the push you've been waiting for. Their marriage seemed solid, almost like that antique piece of furniture that stands the test of time, but only on the outside. Inside, emotional termites were already gnawing at the structure. Everything was so proper, so functional, and so empty. They kept to schedules, responsibilities, and family commitments, but forgot the most important thing: each other. And since all erosion begins small, they didn't even realize when they stopped truly caring about each other. Touch became routine, kisses became greetings, and "I love you" became protocol. There was no longer a spark, just habit. You know that kind of relationship where you know you love someone, but you don't know why? That's when the silence began to make more noise than any argument. There were no fights, and that seemed good, but the problem was that there was also no life. The intimacy didn't die overnight. It slowly deteriorated, like a plant starved of light. At first, he explained it away: it's just a phase. She also thought it was the stress of work, the routine, the kids. But it wasn't. It was the emotional distance becoming a chasm. And as the chasm grows, you start sleeping next to someone who feels more and more like a stranger. The disconnection crept in. A conversationless dinner here, a refusal of affection there, and suddenly, the touch was bothering. Free time that once offered an opportunity to be together became an excuse to stay in separate rooms. Netflix on headphones, social media as an escape valve, and a marriage that, little by little, began to be lived more out of convenience than passion. The most dangerous thing is that this seemed normal. Many couples live this way and think everything is fine. But when the sex cools, the conversation disappears, and the desire fades, it's not normal, it's a cry for help. But they didn't know it yet. They hadn't yet understood that they were walking a fine line between living together or just coexisting. And believe me, most only realize it when they're about to lose everything. He began to sense something was wrong, but couldn't put his finger on it. It was a silent discomfort, an internal irritation. He felt unmotivated, lacking energy, as if he were living on autopilot. Many men go through this without realizing it. They wake up, work, pay bills, but inside they're empty. Not for lack of money, but for lack of connection. And then, my friend, not even professional success can solve the problem. She, on the other hand, felt ignored, unheard. She missed being noticed, missing being desired. And she began to create fantasies in her mind. Does he still love me? Is there someone else? Am I still beautiful to him? She started looking at other families on Instagram and wondering why their love seemed so lackluster. And when comparison sets in, frustration sets in. Sometimes, ruin isn't an explosion, it's a trickle. A "we'll talk later," a "I'm tired today," a "it's nothing, I'm just thinking." And this constant drip creates an emotional flood. Until one of the two, or both, drowns. And that's precisely what began to happen there. A silent drowning in a relationship that had ceased to be a shelter and was beginning to feel like captivity. It's curious how the absence of apparent conflict can be deceiving. They didn't argue, but they also didn't listen to each other. They lived under the same roof, but in parallel worlds. They slept together, but no longer dreamed together. And the absence of shared dreams is one of the first signs that something profound has been lost. But he still had no idea that, behind this apathy, there was an invisible enemy. This enemy had been working silently for a long time, sapping desire, draining vital energy, and sabotaging connection. And no, it wasn't someone else. It was something even more insidious. Something he himself fed every day, and which, little by little, was killing his masculinity, his focus, his presence, and his marriage itself. But he would only discover this when it was too late to ignore. They still had sex. But now, it was almost like brushing teeth. Quick, soulless, just an obligation to keep the relationship from dying. She felt used. He felt rejected. Neither of them said anything, but both sensed it. It was an intimate theater without an audience, where bodies met, but spirits had long since departed. Their conversations, once full of plans and laughter, now boiled down to, "Did you buy any bread?" Or, "Going to pick up the kids?" Any attempt at depth died on the surface. He talked, and she didn't listen. She asked questions, and he answered in monosyllables. The dialogue, once a bridge, became a wall. There was no longer any exchange, only logistics. Like partners in an emotionally bankrupt company. Even touch lost its function. Affection became a demand. The hug, a cold gesture. The kiss, an automatic act. Her feminine energy no longer felt safe in his gaze, and his masculine energy no longer found admiration in hers. And when these polarities break, it's not love that dies, it's magnetism. Without it, a relationship becomes a compromise without attraction. The bed became the loneliest place in the house. They slept side by side, but facing opposite directions. And if they happened to touch each other during the night, it was by accident. She started sleeping in an old t-shirt. He didn't even care anymore. Their desire evaporated. The problem wasn't their age or their time together. It was the lack of presence. The absence of a living energy between them. The spark was extinguished by a bucket of routine. It's in these moments that many people make the mistake of thinking it's normal. But what's common isn't always healthy. Mechanical sex kills a couple's soul. The lack of presence in the gaze, the absence of intentional touch, all of this poisons the bond. And when one of the two stops feeling desired, valued, or heard, they begin to seek it outside. Not always with someone else, but sometimes with silent and more dangerous distractions. He, for example, began to find refuge in pornography. An immediate relief, effortless, without pressure. And the problem is that it seemed to momentarily resolve that emptiness he couldn't explain. But it was just anesthesia. Behind the screen, he was becoming even more disconnected from the real world. From real women. From real life. But at that moment, he still couldn't see it clearly. She, in turn, sought refuge in TV shows, social media, and conversations with friends. She began observing seemingly happy couples, posting subtle hints, and dreaming of a different life. Sometimes she wished he would just say, "You look beautiful today," without her having to provoke him. But his silence was deafening. And, deep down, she had already begun to withdraw emotionally. When communication breaks down, the body feels it. Illnesses begin to appear, frequent migraines, neck tension, insomnia, irritability. The body communicates what the mouth cannot express. And that's exactly what began to happen to them. It wasn't just marital problems, it was an energetic collapse. A disconnection from the essence of both. Many couples stay together like this for years. They raise children, pay bills, and go on vacation. But inside, they're dead. Routine, when not fueled by presence and intention, kills more relationships than infidelity. And he, who still thought he was doing enough, had no idea how emotionally close she already was to leaving. But something was still to come, something he himself secretly nurtured. It was this something that drained his vitality, destroyed his connection to the feminine, and kept him in a constant state of apathy. An old, ingrained habit that seemed harmless, but was corroding everything he loved most. And soon, she would find out. He thought no one knew. That it was just an innocent relief, an old habit kept between four walls and a cold screen. But what began as a teenage curiosity transformed, over the years, into an invisible prison. Pornography was no longer just a pastime. It was a silent refuge, a constant escape from his reality, which seemed increasingly dull and dull. Masturbation became a ritual. Always hidden, always secret, always after she fell asleep or when she went out to run an errand. His brain was already conditioned. Stress? Porn. Boredom? Porn. Lack of affection? Porn. He didn't realize it, but with each video, each scene watched, his vital energy was drained. His masculine presence, his focus, his natural authority, all were being traded for minutes of fleeting pleasure. And it wasn't just his body that paid the price. His mind began to lose sharpness, his willpower waned, and procrastination became his new companion. He felt tired even when doing nothing. He seemed to be constantly a little down, without explanation. But behind this, there was an energy drain that few men dare admit, the constant repetition of purposeless masturbation, fueled by unrealistic and addictive stimuli. The biggest problem was the silent comparison. He would look at his wife and unconsciously compare her to adult actresses. He began to demand from her an artificial sensuality, a plastic performance. This, of course, generated frustration, both in him and in her. The real thing was no longer exciting. Real touch no longer had an impact. Because his dopamine was already completely desensitized. It's cruel to say, but it's true. Many men today can no longer be aroused by the real body of the woman they love. They need extreme fantasies, stronger stimuli, scenes that go too far. And when they return to the real world, everything seems dull. That's exactly what happened to him. And worst of all, he couldn't stop. He tried. But he kept relapsing. It was a behavioral addiction disguised as a common habit. Compulsive masturbation, coupled with pornography consumption, has a devastating effect on male energy. It disrupts hormones, destroys motivation, creates insecurity, and distances men from their true essence. They become less of a leader, less present, less magnetic, and more passive, reactive, and emotionally weak. And this imbalance is what makes a woman lose respect. At this point, he no longer had a voice in the home. Anything he said was ignored or challenged. His wife felt, even without knowing why, that he wasn't fully there. That something was missing. That his energy was absent. And it was. Because where there should have been testosterone, there was guilt. Where there should have been desire, there was anxiety. Where there should have been connection, there was shame. Many men think they have a low libido problem, but that's not it. It's an excess of artificial stimulation. It's an addictive dopamine rush. It's a brain sabotaged by the repetition of purposeless pleasure. He would only discover this later. But at that moment, he was blind. He felt increasingly distant from his wife, his work, and himself. And to make matters worse, he was already beginning to believe this was normal. Pornography steals more than time. It steals a man's soul. It teaches that pleasure doesn't require presence. That desire can be manufactured with a click. That intimacy is dispensable. And when a man absorbs this for years, he becomes incapable of loving deeply. He even wants to, but can't. And the worst part is, he didn't know how to escape this prison, until something unexpected happened. That something would come in the form of a shock. A discovery. A moment of brutal exposure, one that would shatter his comfort zone and force him to look at himself honestly in the mirror for the first time in years. If you're just starting out with semen retention and want to learn how to practice it the right way, safely, and with results, I've prepared an essential ebook for beginners. It's a direct, simple, and transformative step-by-step guide. The link is in the first pinned comment. It was an ordinary day. She needed her laptop to pay some bills. Nothing planned, nothing suspicious. But as she typed the first few letters into the search bar, her world stopped. Her history opened like a wound, explicit, undeniable. Multiple tabs, videos, schedules, everything there. Images of other bodies, other women. Suddenly, everything made sense. The distance, the disinterest, his silent absence. Her heart raced. It was anger, disappointment, sadness, and disgust all rolled into one. It wasn't just pornography. It was emotional betrayal. It was the clearest symbol that she was no longer wanted. And when a woman feels that, something inside her dies. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't break anything. She just closed her laptop, swallowed hard, and began planning her escape. The love didn't end there, but the respect did. When he arrived, she was cold. She hid it. But inside, the volcano was already erupting. She waited for him to shower, lay down in silence, and decided not to say anything that day. But the next day, she was direct. "I need to talk to you." He froze. He didn't know what it was about, but his conscience was already twisting. And all it took was her 3 words, "I saw everything." He felt like he'd been caught with his pants down, literally and symbolically. He couldn't deny it. His voice trembled, his face burned. He tried to justify it. He said it was just a habit, that it had nothing to do with her, that it was just an escape valve. But the more he talked, the further she pulled away. She didn't want explanations. She wanted a whole man. Present. Connected. Real. She threatened to leave home. She said she couldn't stand sharing a bed with a ghost anymore. That she felt compared, replaced, diminished. That it wasn't fair to try to maintain a marriage alone while he preferred to live in a fantasy world. And she was right. Because pornography had become a parallel relationship. One with fewer demands, but also with 0 depth. He begged her. He said he would change. That he would stop. That he needed a chance. But she no longer believed him. She'd heard promises before, about other things. And in that moment, it wasn't his words that would make a difference. It would be his actions. She gave him an ultimatum. Either you change, or I'm leaving. And for the first time, he felt like he could truly lose everything. That pain was the turning point. For the first time, he understood how deeply he had sunk. It was no longer a matter of morality or religion. It was survival. If he didn't change, he would lose his family, his home, his honor as a man. It was then that he fell into despair. But sometimes, it's at rock bottom that you find the only solid wall to lean on and climb back up. He began searching. Videos, texts, testimonials. He didn't know what exactly he was looking for, but he wanted to understand how to break out of that cycle. And it was in this desperate search that he found something he had never taken seriously until then. The Practice of SEMEN Retention. A video of a man sharing how this practice saved his life caught his attention. And for the first time in a long time, he felt hope. It was just the beginning. A glimpse. A what if? And it was that what if that planted the seed of change. But he still had no idea what lay ahead. Not the trials. Not the relapses. Not the revelations. I was about to embark on a lonely, difficult, but profoundly transformative journey. He sat on the couch, unsure of what to do with himself. The silence of the house seemed to scream in his ears. His wife, cold. The atmosphere, heavy. His heart, a whirlwind of guilt, fear, and helplessness. For the first time, he understood that apologizing wasn't enough. He would have to rebuild himself completely. But where to begin, when everything seemed to be falling apart at once? He opened his phone with trembling hands. He typed, "How to stop watching porn." He clicked on the first video that appeared. A guy was talking about semen retention. About vital energy. About regaining a woman's respect without saying a word, just changing his posture, his presence, his gaze. He found it strange, even mystical, but something inside him reacted. Curiosity mixed with desperation. He decided to give it a try. A 7-day challenge. 7 days without pornography, without masturbation, without ejaculation. It's impossible, he thought. But at the same time, he was overcome with internal rage. How could something so small control his life so much? How could he, who had faced so many hardships, bow down to such a petty habit? It was time to turn this around, even if it was out of stubbornness. In the first few days, everything seemed to get worse. Anxiety, irritability, a strange feeling of emptiness. His body screamed for dopamine. His mind made excuses. But something kept him going. Maybe it was the image of his wife packing her bags. Maybe it was wounded pride. Maybe it was a forgotten instinct to fight for himself. But he decided to resist. One day at a time. 1 second at a time. He began to write down his thoughts. He realized how pornography was just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath it all lay neediness, insecurity, and unresolved stress. He began walking more, taking cold showers, and breathing deeply before acting. Simple things, but they brought a sense of recovery. It wasn't just about stopping a habit, it was about regaining control. You read about men who spent 30, 60, 90 days in semen retention and became different. More confident. More magnetic. More centered. The word magnetism intrigued him. To be desired without effort. To lead without shouting. He'd never been that kind of man. But he wanted to be. He felt that, deep down, this force had always been dormant within him. It just needed to be awakened. It was during this period that he understood, the true man is not the one who dominates others, it's the one who dominates himself. And that his sexual energy was a creative force, not something to be wasted. He began to see sex no longer as an escape valve, but as an expression of real connection. Something sacred. Something he had trivialized for years. And this awareness began to transform him. He hadn't told his wife anything yet. He wanted her to feel the change, not hear promises. She began to find his silence, his posture, his gaze strange. He no longer tried to justify himself or ask for affection. He was focused. It was as if he had his feet back on the ground after years of floating in illusions. And this new air began to circulate throughout the house, even without words. At the end of the 7 days, something inside him shifted. It wasn't the end, but the beginning. He realized that the real challenge wasn't resisting desire, it was transforming desire into direction. And that direction was clear now. He wanted to win his wife back, yes. But, above all, he wanted to win himself back. To reclaim his dignity, his strength, the sparkle in his eyes. And he knew the road would be long. Even so, he decided to continue. A new challenge, 30 days. Not just without ejaculating, but transmuting that energy into presence, action, and leadership. It was still too early to know what this would bring, but he already felt, deep down, that he was on the right path. And soon, his own wife would begin to notice, too. For the first 3 days, he thought he was going crazy. It was as if he'd turned off an automatic switch that had been on for years. His entire body was showing signs of withdrawal, restlessness, lack of focus, unexplained irritability. Even the sound of the clock seemed unbearable. Am I going crazy? He wondered. But it wasn't madness. It was detox. The brain, accustomed to high, easy doses of dopamine, now resembled a spoiled teenager without a toy. Everything seemed boring. Tasks seemed pointless. He tried to read, think, meditate, and his mind would wander to unwanted places. All it took was seeing an advertisement featuring a beautiful woman, and the struggle began. An internal conflict between the old impulse and the new decision. And then came the wet dreams. The first one was frightening. He woke up in the middle of the night, sweaty, and feeling guilty. He felt like he had failed. But after researching, he discovered that this type of dream was common in the early days of semen retention. His body was simply trying to readjust. It wasn't a relapse, it was a natural process. This reassured him, but it didn't alleviate his frustration. He began to understand that the challenge of retention wasn't just physical. It was mental, emotional, and spiritual. He needed to create new habits. He started waking up earlier, doing bodyweight exercises, and taking cold showers right after getting out of bed. These practices, though simple, helped calm his mind and strengthen his discipline. Each small victory generated a little more confidence. The irritation persisted. Little things set him off. A misplaced glass, a delay in traffic, even his wife's tone of voice. But instead of reacting, he began to breathe deeply. He counted to 5, then to 10. It was difficult. Sometimes he failed. But when he managed to control himself, he felt something new, power. A different power, quiet, steady. It was as if he were beginning to master himself. In moments of greatest tension, he began to write. He would grab his phone, open his notebook, and pour everything out. He wrote things he would never have the courage to say out loud. Not to blame anyone, but to understand himself. And, amidst these notes, he began to notice patterns. When did he feel weakest? What triggers made him want to give up? What kind of thoughts opened the door? The response was always emotional. Loneliness, frustration, fear. At those times, he felt the urge to return to his old habits. It was like a comfort. But now he knew, if he gave in, he'd be trading a moment of relief for more days of emptiness. And his wife still watched from afar. Cold, distant, but silently attentive. She wanted to see how long this would last. In the last few days of the week, something began to change. His anxiety diminished, his sleep improved. He began to experience small bursts of mental clarity. Ideas began to emerge again, as if disconnected wires in his brain were reconnecting. It was still early, but I could already feel the difference. He was more productive at work, more lucid in conversations, more aware of his own actions. Even so, doubt still lingered. Can I keep this up? What if I fail tomorrow? But he began to understand that he didn't need to win the entire week at once. He just needed to win the next hour, then the next, and then another. A war isn't won with a single blow, it's in the sum of silent battles that a warrior is formed. And it was through this silent discipline that he began to build something that not even his wife expected. Not an apology, but a new version of himself. Stronger, more composed, more manly. And this new energy, though still timid, was about to overflow in a way no one expected. Starting on the 8th day, he began to notice something subtle, but powerful. His mind was less cloudy. Ideas came more clearly, as if a fog had lifted. He began to remember things he'd often forgotten before. His productivity increased. Tasks that had previously felt like a burden now flowed smoothly. It was as if his brain had breathed again. The libido was still there, but different. It was no longer that animal, uncontrolled urgency. It was a latent, living energy that he could direct. He realized he could use this force to create. He wrote an old project that had been shelved. He cleaned out the inside of his car, reorganized his wardrobe, and resumed his disciplined training. The energy that had previously dissipated in seconds now accumulated and propelled him forward. At work, his colleagues noticed. They commented that he seemed more focused. One of them even asked if he was taking a leadership course. He just smiled. He didn't want to explain yet. But inside, something was ignited, the pride of seeing his own transformation begin to be noticed by others, without fanfare, without publicity. Just presence. At home, things began to change subtly. He began to listen more. When his wife spoke, he didn't interrupt. He just looked her in the eye and listened. This, which seemed so simple, had an unexpected effect. She felt seen, respected, for the first time in a long time. And this rekindled a spark of curiosity in her. What's going on with him? He no longer needed validation as much. He felt more whole, more sufficient. Not to isolate himself, but to not depend on the approval of others to feel good. This emotional autonomy is rare, and it creates an aura of security that can be felt in the tone of voice, posture, and gaze. And this, even without words, begins to impact those around him, especially the woman who shares his roof. One day, he came home from work early and, instead of flopping down on the couch or picking up his cell phone, went straight to the kitchen, made some coffee, and called his wife over to talk. He didn't talk about the past or his mistakes. He simply asked how she was doing. She responded coldly, but he didn't react. He just listened. And this, again, disconcerted her. She wasn't used to that kind of man. Calm, present, stable. His energy was beginning to shift. He still hadn't said a word about semen retention, but practice was already beginning to shape his presence. He was firmer, more thoughtful, more strategic. He made decisions more clearly, no longer swayed by emotions. Even the timbre of his voice seemed deeper. This change wasn't magic. It was the result of a profound reconfiguration. He began to study more. He discovered authors like Napoleon Hill and David Data, and even delved into Eastern traditions about the power of semen as a vital energy. He learned that retention had been used by warriors, monks, artists, and spiritual leaders for millennia. And for the first time, he felt part of something greater. As if he were accessing knowledge that most men ignore due to sheer lack of awareness. It wasn't easy. Sometimes, his mind still sabotaged him. The desire to return to his old routine arose like a warm breeze in the desert. But he already had resources. He took deep breaths. He exercised. He listened to motivational audio. He wrote in his notebook. He had already understood that desires pass, but the results of discipline remain. And there, in the middle of the second week, he realized something extraordinary. He no longer wanted to be the man he'd been before. Not just to win his wife back, but because he was finally beginning to admire who he was becoming. And this self-admiration would be just the beginning of what was yet to come. Everything I'm explaining to you here, I break down more calmly in my ebook The Power of Semen Retention. It was created for those who are starting from scratch and want to know how to apply semen retention to their daily lives in a healthy way, without any crazy ideas or exaggerations. It's a practical guide, straight to the point. 30 days had passed. A whole month without falling. No pornography, no masturbation, no ejaculation. To many, this seems impossible. But he had done it. And he hadn't just survived, he'd flourished. He was no longer that reactive man, who would explode at the slightest thing or cower under any tension. He now observed, pondered, led. He began to make decisions more firmly. He set schedules, planned finances, and proposed changes at home. Nothing authoritarian, but with authority. His wife, who had previously seen him as a lost boy, began to see him differently. That looked somewhere between fear and admiration, between curiosity and attraction. It was subtle, but real. His energy now said, "I'm back." He didn't try to convince anyone, nor did he justify himself. When his wife tested his emotional limits, he no longer played along. He didn't scream, he didn't run away, he didn't shut down. He simply stood his ground. His gaze was deeper. Not with arrogance, but with presence. He knew who he was. And a man who knows himself, even in silence, commands. In his daily routine, he began to lead by example. He began to do activities with his children more attentively. He stopped complaining about work and started a new online course. He organized his closet without anyone asking. And little by little, his wife began to follow suit, without him saying a word. Masculine energy in balance has this silent power to influence. Emotionally, he could already tell when he was about to lose his bearings. And instead of blaming himself, he used tools. He'd take a cold shower, do 20 push-ups, or walk for 15 minutes in silence. He was no longer a slave to his emotions. And this made him a safe haven. Not only for his wife, but for himself. She began to open up. One day, out of the blue, she sat next to him on the couch and said, "You look different." He simply replied, "I'm getting back to who I should have been all along." She remained silent. Respect was being restored. Desire, still shy, was showing its signs. But most importantly, trust was being rebuilt. Now he understood that the semen retention it wasn't about abstinence. It was about direction. About self-mastery. About transmuting sexual energy into spiritual strength. This understanding didn't come from books, it came from experience. From pain. From the abyss that nearly swallowed her marriage. And now, each day was a new opportunity to rise. A clear example was at a dinner with friends. His wife, previously uncomfortable next to him, now sat close, touched his arm, and laughed with him. Small gestures that, for those who understand energy, say everything. He no longer needed to ask for respect or affection. He attracted them naturally. Because he had returned to vibrating at the frequency of a present, firm, and trustworthy man. He began helping other men too. A friend in a marital crisis called, and he said, "Brother, you need to stop ejaculating for no reason." The other man laughed. But he spoke with such truth that it generated silence. This is the strength of someone who lives what they say. Of someone who leads without forcing. Of someone who inspires without needing to be a guru. He was, without realizing it, becoming an example. And even though there was still a long way to go, he already knew, what he was building wasn't just a restored marriage, It was a solid, authentic, and unshakable masculine identity. And this new emotional foundation would give rise to something even more powerful in the days to come. Something began to change in the house, and no one could explain what. He didn't give motivational speeches, nor did he demand recognition. His mere presence carried a quiet strength, a kind of magnetism that didn't shout, but attracted. Even the children began to obey more easily. His tone of voice had changed, and with it, the entire vibe of the home. His wife, who had previously ignored him, now noticed his movements. The way he entered the room, the way he looked, his silence, everything seemed to say more than words. One day, she watched him coming out of the shower and felt something she hadn't felt in a long time: desire. Not for a sculpted body, but for an authentic masculine energy. He no longer begged for attention. He inspired her. This kind of magnetism isn't learned in a seduction course. It doesn't come from ready-made phrases or cheap techniques. It's born from semen retention combined with conscious action. When a person harnesses their vital energy and transforms it into purpose, it changes their appearance, their way of walking, even the sparkle in their eyes. And this change is felt before it can be explained. At work, they began to consult him more. They asked his opinion, listened to his ideas. One colleague even commented, "Man, you look different, you seem more manly." He just smiled. Not out of arrogance, but because he knew the compliment wasn't about his physique, it was about his energy. He had reconnected with something few men today recognize: his true inner power. His wife tried to understand. He didn't say much, but his actions spoke volumes. The way he led the routine, his attention to detail, his consistency in the little things. One day, she dreamed about him. A sensual, spontaneous, vivid dream. She woke up confused. It was as if her body was responding to his new frequency, even if her mind still resisted. On the street, women began to notice. It wasn't standard beauty. It was poise. He didn't look away, didn't slouch, didn't explain himself. It made an impact. One woman did a double take at the grocery store. Another struck up a conversation at the gym. But he was focused. He knew that true power lies not in attracting, but in choosing. And he had already chosen to rebuild his home, his honor, his legacy. He began reading about sexual energy in ancient cultures. He discovered that samurai, monks, alchemists, and great leaders used this energy as creative fuel. He learned about sexual transmutation taught by Napoleon Hill and understood that this inner fire, when tamed, ignites everything around it. Now it made sense why he was magnetizing people and situations without exerting any effort. Even his style of dress changed. It wasn't anything extravagant, but there was more care, more intention. His erect posture, his steady gaze, his measured speech. All of this created a presence that commanded respect without the need for harsh words. His wife began to notice. One day, she observed him talking to another couple and thought, "He's becoming the man I fell in love with again, or maybe he's becoming even better." And it was there that something began to be reborn in her. Still unexplained, still unspoken. But her body, her instincts, her heart, everything began to respond to that new frequency. And when a woman senses that the man next to her is ascending, she naturally begins to want to follow him. Even if she still resists. Even if you don't understand. Because deep down, every woman wants a man on a mission. And now he was on a mission, silent, disciplined, constant. And this new rhythm was about to make room for something they no longer remembered what it felt like, a truly intimate reunion. 70 days had passed. It wasn't just about resistance anymore. It was about flowing. The house was different. His wife didn't say anything directly, but her body had already changed its language. Her glances lingered a little longer. Her smiles came effortlessly. And the touch, that spontaneous touch on the shoulder, the arm, the neck, was back. The atmosphere between them had changed. It was as if something old, but forgotten, was being rediscovered. She proposed a trip. A weekend, just the two of them. No kids. No distractions. No plans. He accepted without hesitation. It was the perfect moment. During the trip, there were no demands. There were no discussions about the past. Only presence. They walked hand in hand, laughed, and ate lunch in silence, looking out at the sea. He didn't try to force anything. Neither did she. And that's precisely why it all happened again. On the second night, she hugged him from behind, whispered something in his ear. And for the first time in a long time, they made love, not sex. It wasn't technical, nor performative. It was pure presence. He wasn't in a hurry. She wasn't afraid. It was slow, natural, deep. An energetic dance between the masculine and feminine reunited. And when it was over, they were silent, just breathing together. His touch was different. Firmer, but with intention. She felt safe in his arms. And safety is an aphrodisiac. More than that, it's essential. Every woman wants to surrender, but only when she feels there's firmness on the other side. And now there was. Because he no longer needed her to feel like a man. And precisely because of that, she wanted to be a woman by his side again. In the following days, the atmosphere between them became lighter. Conversations came naturally. The jokes returned. Even old topics that had previously caused arguments were now handled with maturity. He didn't run away. She didn't attack. It was as if they had become emotional adults. And this created a new rhythm, not the same as before, but something better, more conscious, more genuine. His energy remained steadfast. It wasn't a reconquest project. It was a new lifestyle. He continued practicing semen retention, not out of obligation, but because it had become part of him. Like brushing his teeth, drinking water, taking deep breaths. A daily choice to preserve his life force and put it at the service of something greater. And this was reflected in everything. His wife began to comment to her friends. He's different. For the better. Her friends were curious. Some were skeptical. But she knew, it wasn't magic. It was attitude. He had become a man again. A man with a mission, direction, and balance. And this, even without her understanding the details, ignited in her a genuine desire to accompany him, not out of obligation, but instinct. One afternoon, she caught him reading a black-covered book, lying on the couch. It was The Power of Your Subconscious Mind, by Joseph Murphy. He turned and asked, "Have you read this one?" She said no. He said, "You should read it. It contains things that help you understand how we sabotage ourselves emotionally." That touched her. Because he didn't want to teach. He wanted to grow with her. And that seed of shared growth was planted there. 70 days earlier, they had been on the brink of divorce. Now, they were discovering a new way to walk together. There were still wounds. There were still painful memories. But there was something stronger, a mutual will to move on. And in the coming days, he would reveal the truth he had hidden until then. It was an ordinary night, but he felt the need to open his heart. There was no longer any fear. Only truth. They sat at the kitchen table, as they had so many times before. But this time, the mood was different. He took a deep breath, held her hand firmly, and said, "I need to tell you something, and you deserve to know." Her eyes widened, but she remained silent. He started from the beginning. He told her about the video he'd seen, about the 7 days, then 30, then 60, until he got to this, 90 days off SEMEN retention. He talked about pornography, about compulsive masturbation, about how much he felt enslaved by it. And, with a choked voice, he confessed, "I was losing myself, and I almost lost you because of it." She listened without interrupting. Her heart pounded. His words weren't rehearsed. They came from deep within. He didn't try to justify himself. He simply explained. He told her how difficult the first few days were, how he'd felt like giving up, how he'd fought his own demons. And, little by little, how he began to feel stronger, clearer, more alive. She cried. But not out of anger. She cried for everything that had been said and for everything that never was. She cried because she felt that the man in front of her was no longer the same. He was a new man. Or rather, he was the man she had always known existed within him, but who had been obscured by years of escape, distraction, and absence. He held back tears. He said he now understood what it meant to be a man. That it wasn't about giving orders, nor about being macho. It was about presence, about owning one's mistakes. about transforming pain into strength. He said he didn't promise perfection, but he did promise awareness. And that from that point on, his mission was to continue growing alongside her if she still wanted. She didn't respond immediately. She just stood up, walked over to him, and hugged him. A long, silent hug, loaded with meaning. She simply said, "Thank you for not giving up." And in that moment, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: forgiveness. Not the easy, superficial kind, but the kind that heals, that frees, that restores. The conversation lasted hours. They talked about the beginning, about where they went wrong, about what they still felt. He listened more than he spoke. He didn't defend himself. He simply welcomed her. She spoke about the pain of feeling rejected, about the fear of no longer being loved, about the silent loneliness. And he, for the first time, was able to listen without guilt, but with maturity. In the end, they sealed that moment with a kiss. Not a forced fresh start kiss, but a real kiss. A kiss from someone who had gone through the darkness and found the light together. That day, they not only saved their marriage, they buried the old version of themselves, and began building a new story. And that night, while she slept, he opened the notebook where he recorded everything. He wrote, "Today is day 90. I told her everything, and she stayed. Not because she needs me, but because she chose me again." And before he turned out the light, he sensed that something much bigger was just beginning. Want to start your journey with awareness and confidence? Then click on the first pinned comment now, get the ebook, and take the first step toward your transformation. It's all there, clear, objective, and designed for those who truly want to evolve. Today, he wakes up early, not out of obligation, but out of pleasure. He has a routine that strengthens his mind, body, and spirit. He starts the day with silence, deep breathing, reading, and gratitude. Semen retention. It's become more than a practice. It's become a lifestyle. It's not about repressing yourself, but about mastering yourself. And this self-control spills over into all areas of life. His wife now truly admires him. Not for what he promises, but for who he has become. She feels safe by his side, protected by a stable and present energy. The marriage, once fragile, now flourishes with maturity. They no longer live on illusions or fairy tales, but on mutual respect, truth, and conscious desire. And this is rarer and more powerful than any fleeting passion. Sex is back, yes, but with a different meaning. Now it's communion. It's surrender. It's a celebration of the connection they built with effort and intention. He's no longer seeking orgasms, he's seeking impact, presence, energy exchange. And she feels it. His every touch carries awareness. And her every surrender comes from trusting who he is, not just what he does. He became an example. He doesn't talk about it much, but he lives in an inspiring way. Other men notice. Friends ask. One of them has already started practicing retention too, after a sincere conversation. He understood that when a man heals his sexuality, he heals his destiny. Because sexual energy is creative energy. And when a man wastes it, he also loses himself. They still face challenges, of course. Real life isn't perfect. But now, they face everything as a team. And the best part, he no longer tries to fix her. He just stands firm, and that's enough. The restored masculine energy allows the feminine to flourish. And the house vibrates at a new frequency. The children notice. Friends comment. And, deep down, they both know, they've been through the valley, and come out stronger. On their wedding anniversary, she wrote a note and slipped it into his pants pocket. "Thank you for choosing to fight for us. You make me want to be better every day." He read it, took a deep breath, and smiled. He knew this recognition wasn't neediness, it was admiration. And that is the greatest reward for a man who chooses to become his own master. Today, he looks back and sees clearly, if he hadn't faced his addictions, he would have lost everything. But he also understands that the breakdown was necessary. That the pain was the calling. That the crisis was the push he needed to escape mediocrity and embrace the man he could be. The version of himself his wife always dreamed of having by her side, and that he, deep down, always knew he could become. They plan for the future with their feet on the ground and their hearts aligned. They think about traveling more, about undertaking joint ventures, about raising their children with presence and values. But above all, they live the present with more truth. Because they learned the hard way that love without awareness doesn't last. And that presence is worth more than any pretty speech. And so, without needing to shout to the world, they move on. A couple who once hit rock bottom, but chose to rise. A man who was once a slave to his own desire, but now masters his destiny. And a woman who, instead of running away, chose to stay. Because she saw, with her own eyes, the rebirth of a man. And that rekindles any love. Now that you know this story, tell me honestly, are you going to continue betraying yourself while you wait for the world to value you? Or will you do what few men do, and truly change? Most choose the easy path, remaining addicted to immediate pleasure, ready-made excuses, and habits that only drain their energy. But some choose the path of awareness. And it is these who transform their lives, their homes, and their presence in the world. Are you going to stay the same, or are you going to start practicing? You've seen that it's possible. Now it's your turn. Is it hard work? Yes. But continuing as is costs much more. If this content awakened you, made you reflect, or even bothered you in a good way, like the video, subscribe to the channel and activate notifications. This not only helps the channel grow, but also allows me to continue delivering valuable content like this, which gets straight to the point and says what many avoid saying. And tell me in the comments, which part of this story touched you the most? Have you ever tried to go 7 days without ejaculating? Or will you try now?